Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us on News at Prime. Let's take you back to our top story now. President Cyril Ramaphosa's budget vote speech was overshadowed by chaotic scenes at the National Assembly. It followed allegations by former State Security Agency boss Arthur Frazier that hidden cash valued at between 62 million and 125 million rand had been stolen from the president's residence in 2020. Ramaphosa has been under immense pressure to explain the situation, with the opposition parties even trying to prevent him from tabling the presidency budget. To unpack this further, I'm joined now by a research fellow at the Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. We know that the president's budget vote speech was overshadowed with allegations about his own conduct over the Phala robbery debacle. Today, the president said he received advice that he should not respond to what he said was speculation, conjecture, allegations, or so-called revelations. What are your thoughts around this?
I suppose we should respect what the president has said. I suppose also that in a time such as this, it's very natural and part of the robustness of our parliamentary system, and it's become almost a culture or a routine of resistance, of pushing back, of disruption. And some of it may not be as productive as it could be, but I do suppose that it really isn't our place to comment further on that.
At the end of it all, the president did eventually deliver his speech. He talked about the fuel prices and food hikes and said that there's not much that can be done because on government's end, they've responded by dealing with the price of fuel and releasing strategic stock. I mean, is that sufficient, especially considering that South Africans are still reeling from the electricity tariff increases, hikes in the repo rate, food, inflation, transport, also being hobbled by the month-on-month increases in petrol prices that have now reached around 24 rand per litre?
Yeah, and I think that the other piece of this is that this comes off the back of quite a lot of promises and a lot of undertakings over the past year and a half to provide much greater support to small businesses, to also ensure that the level of consumption and market access and, spending power wouldn't be too hampered at domestic level. But as we're aware, there's been a high level of retrenchment. We know that the unemployment figures have gone up considerably. Even the unofficial number, the unofficial statistics are now catching up with the official statistics, who say 30%, and many of us who are more heterodox economists have been saying it is over 40%. As we're aware, for young people, that figure goes up quite significantly and extremely troublingly to over 75%. The number of young women and women who are unemployed as well is higher than the national average, well over 50%. I mean, there's also a class and income aggregate to that. And of course, the other piece of that is that many of the small businesses which should have been provided with relief for them to be able to then continue over the last 24 months didn't receive much relief. So the statistics suggest that at least a couple of hundred businesses, small businesses per month, have also gone under over the past 2 years. And the last piece of that is that food poverty, which means at household level, the numbers of people who go hungry or who are malnourished has gone up by over 11%, which is a massive number of households. And as you rightly say, off the back of fuel price increases, of increased interest rate increases for car payments, house payments, all of this is extremely difficult. It's a very difficult environment.
So what then needs to happen from a leadership point of view in the face of such a crisis?
Look, we need to be much more intentional and about how we're going to redistribute. So I think that initially one of the first things was that the modalities of COVID relief funding for businesses were so strenuous. I mean, egregiously strenuous, where the CIPIC documentation is required, where SARS documentation is also required, where VAT, PAYE, and all of these other modalities of business are also required. Many small businesses have not had the opportunity, the capacity to get up to speed on a lot of those regulatory requirements. So what this begins to feel like for them is that rather than being a relief for them and the opportunity to get support, it does begin for many small businesses to start feeling like a policing exercise, where if they present themselves to SARS or they present themselves for relief funding, they will then be scrutinized and go into things that perhaps they're not in a position to deal with, such as massive SARS rebates, massive paying back SARS and all of these things. The other piece of that is that we could potentially have done different things to ensure that the sectors which are the most labor intensive would then be protected. Now, different countries have done this differently. I know that at some point both Vietnam and Japan were printing money. I am not a great fan of quantitative easing. However, the word unprecedented has kept on coming up over the last 2.5 years. And during these unprecedented times, it would seem useful to begin to flush some money in a regulated way into key sectors of the economy to prevent job losses and to also ensure that those particular sectors remain productive, that they're able to capitalize on their competitive advantage. And then the last piece of that is also that I think that the state and the government by now should have been able to see that there are different ways to enable young people to transition into the economy. And I think, and on a short to medium term, what the COVID-19 pandemic has done, it has really illustrated ongoing fragilities, existing fragilities. So, for example, even though the special relief grant, has been extended for another 12 months, I think until 2023, March 2023 or something like that. This only illustrates that there's such a huge dearth in people who don't have any form of social relief. So when we think about young people who don't even have the income to job hunt, who don't even have the income to get on a taxi, to go and look for a job, to go to an interview, who don't have the mechanisms to print their CVs, go to an internet cafe or the data to search for work. These are real day-to-day issues. And I think that certainly the state and the government at a time such as this needs to be much more intentional. And I think that one of the things that struck me was that the president spoke about the country being within reach of the 1 trillion rands of purported and projected foreign direct investment and different forms of investment. But the question keeps on arising: where are these investments making a tangible or palpable impact? To whom and in which sectors are these investments really making a meaningful impact in terms of transfer of skill, transfer of technology, and of course, how are they landing on communities? How many jobs have actually been created as a result of this? And given that we are actually shedding jobs, there does seem to be a disconnect between what has been, what the state wants to do or says they're doing and how it's being experienced by the majority of people in this country.
Absolutely. What about the president's remarks about the foundations upon which economic recovery is built? I mean, he said that they have to be solid and coherent. This now speaks to policy and perhaps loopholes in implementation processes.
Yeah. So remember that even during the last budget speech under Minister Gondongwana, he mentioned that about 13.4 million people have no income, and about 18 million people are living below this food poverty line that I mentioned. And yet, this social relief of distress only accounts for about 10 million people. So there's already something of a chasm in that regard. And then added to this is that this is almost 500,000 less than the number of approved applications. So on a very micro, granular level, there doesn't seem to be any real understanding that the missing middle and the working poor, who are the ones who at any given moment are the most precarious, are going to continue living in precarity. Remember that at the beginning of, of March 2020, when this whole strange dystopia that we now call our lives began to descend on us, that one of the first things that happened was that all of the water tanks were then being delivered to particular townships, especially, African townships across the country. And it begs the question, why was this infrastructure not in place in the first place? If we need to now keep our distance, wash our hands, but in households where there are 5, 10, 15 people in a 4-room household, how do you keep your distance? And because of the poor spatial planning and not only the legacies of apartheid spatial planning, but I think the poor social and urban and rural planning over the last 25 years, we find ourselves not only dealing with legacy issues, but building new difficulties for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for weighing in on that discussion. That was Research Fellow at the Trade Collective, Lebohang Pheko, speaking to some of the other parts of the President's budget vote speech.